I never thought my son's wedding would be the day I felt like a stranger in my own family. I was standing there, holding my small bouquet, smiling at the guests, when my new daughter-in-law leaned toward me. Her voice was low, but every word cut deep. "Don't speak to my family." For a second, I thought I misheard her. This was supposed to be a happy day. I managed a polite smile, thinking it must be some kind of strange joke. But then my eyes followed hers, and I saw who was standing next to her. My heart dropped so fast, I could barely breathe. Right then, I knew, if I stayed here 1 second longer, I might break in front of everyone. The morning of the wedding felt like it carried years of hope. I woke up early, laid out the light blue dress Ethan had picked for me, and remembered how he smiled when he first saw it. "You look like the mother of the year," he'd said, and I held on to those words like they were a gift. The venue was a vineyard in Napa Valley, the kind you see in magazines, rows of green stretching to the horizon, fairy lights hanging between wooden beams, music floating through the air. Guests were already laughing and clinking glasses when I arrived. I took a deep breath and told myself this was going to be perfect. Today wasn't just about Ethan and Sam getting married. For me, it was about finally meeting Sam's family and starting a new chapter where we could all belong together. I thought about how far Ethan and I had come. When his father, Richard, left us, Ethan was just 8. I worked days in a small bakery and nights cleaning offices, barely sleeping, but always making sure Ethan never missed a school trip or went without a gift on his birthday. We were a team, just the two of us, weathering every storm life threw at us. Walking into that vineyard, I believed all of that sacrifice had led to this. My son's happiness, his future, and maybe even a bigger family for me to love. I had no idea the first words I'd hear from my new daughter-in-law would be a warning to stay silent. The ceremony was beautiful, the kind of wedding you'd expect to see in a movie. The music was soft and warm, the vows were heartfelt, and I clapped along with everyone else as Ethan and Sam walked back up the aisle as husband and wife. I tried to push aside the strange warning Sam had given me earlier, telling myself I was just overthinking it. Maybe she was stressed, maybe she didn't want any awkward moments with her relatives, and maybe she'd explain later. I moved into the reception area, where guests were gathering under the open-air canopy, decorated with strings of golden lights. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread drifted through the air, and waiters floated by with trays of champagne. I was determined to keep smiling and play the role of the proud mother, even if a knot of unease sat in my stomach. I made my way toward Sam, thinking I'd try again to talk, to maybe compliment her and start fresh. But as I stepped up, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Remember what I said," she murmured, glancing toward the group of people she'd been talking to. Her parents stood there, tall and polished, their expressions unreadable. Next to them were a few relatives I assumed were cousins and uncles, all engaged in quiet conversation. I froze, unsure what she expected me to do. Was I supposed to ignore them entirely? It was awkward enough not knowing them, but now I was being told to act like they didn't exist. I laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension. "Sam, is something wrong? Did I do something?" Her eyes flicked back to mine, cool and measured. "It's better this way, trust me." Then she turned and rejoined the group, leaving me standing there like I didn't belong. I felt my cheeks heat up as I moved back toward the bar, pretending to be interested in the hors d'oeuvres while my mind spun. Why would my daughter-in-law, on her wedding day, want to keep me away from her own family? I caught sight of Ethan across the room, chatting with some friends from college. I gave him a small wave, and he came over, his smile a little too forced. "Mom, everything okay?" he asked, avoiding my eyes. "Ethan, why did Sam tell me not to talk to her family? What's going on?" He let out a breath, glancing around before lowering his voice. "It's just complicated, okay? We'll talk later." And just like that, he patted my arm and walked back to his friends. Complicated? That was his answer. I stood there, surrounded by laughter and music, feeling more and more like a stranger. People I'd never met were glancing at me in ways I couldn't quite read, some curious, some almost cautious. My stomach churned. I decided I'd at least try to enjoy the food and talk to some of Ethan's friends. But just as I started toward the buffet, a murmur went through the crowd. I turned to see who had arrived, and that's when I noticed Sam breaking into a wide smile as she crossed the courtyard to greet a tall man in a dark suit. He carried himself with an air of familiarity, his stride confident. My breath caught the second his face turned toward me. It was Richard, my ex-husband, the man I hadn't seen in more than 20 years, the man who had walked out on me and our son for another woman, leaving us with unpaid bills and a home we couldn't keep. The man who never once called to see how Ethan was doing, who missed every birthday, every graduation, every single important moment in his child's life. And here he was, standing with my new daughter-in-law, smiling and shaking hands with her family like he belonged there. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I gripped the edge of the nearest table just to steady myself. My mind flooded with questions. Did Ethan know? Had he spoken to his father behind my back? How long had Sam been in touch with him? And why was I the one told to keep my distance while the man who abandoned us was being welcomed like a guest of honor? I stood rooted to the spot as Sam's hand touched Richard's arm in a familiar way, introducing him around as though he were some long-lost friend. My pulse raced, and my face burned with humiliation. The warning suddenly made sense. She didn't want me speaking to her family because she didn't want me telling them who Richard really was. She didn't want the truth interfering with whatever story she and Ethan had agreed to share. I could feel my composure slipping, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. Inside, though, the betrayal was sharp and raw, and I knew something between Ethan and me had changed forever. I stood there, my eyes locked on Richard as memories I had buried deep came rushing back. The sound of the slammed door the night he left, the months of struggling to pay bills, the way Ethan cried himself to sleep asking why his father didn't love him. Seeing him now, standing tall and confident as if none of that had happened, made my chest tighten. I could feel the sting of tears behind my eyes, but I knew I couldn't let them fall here. Not in front of him, not in front of Sam's family, who were clearly being charmed by his practiced smile and easy conversation. The more I watched, the more I realized this wasn't some accidental encounter. This had been planned. Sam must have known exactly what she was doing when she brought him here. The way she touched his arm, the way her parents stood beside him. It was as though he was part of her family now, while I was being pushed to the edges of my own son's life. My first instinct was to march over there and demand answers. I wanted to tell Sam's family exactly who Richard was, how he had abandoned his wife and son without looking back. I wanted to ask Ethan why he hadn't warned me, why he thought it was okay to blindside me like this on the most important day of his life. But I also knew that would only give them what they wanted. A scene, a moment they could twist into making me look bitter and unstable. Richard would love nothing more than to see me lose control in public. I refused to give him that satisfaction. I reminded myself that dignity is something no one can take from you unless you hand it over willingly. So, I made a choice. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed the front of my dress, and decided I would not approach them. If Ethan wanted Richard in his life, that was his decision, but I would not be part of whatever story they were telling to make it seem acceptable. I would protect myself by keeping my distance, even if it meant walking away entirely. I glanced around the courtyard, looking for a quiet place where I could collect myself. That's when I saw Ethan again, standing by the dessert table, laughing at something one of his groomsmen had said. I walked toward him, determined to at least speak my mind before I left. "Ethan," I said softly, and his smile faded when he saw my face. "You knew he was coming, didn't you?" He hesitated, glancing over my shoulder as if to check who might be listening. "Mom, please, today isn't the day to get into this." The words stung like a slap. "The day you marry the woman you love is exactly the day to be honest," I told him. "Why didn't you tell me?" His jaw tightened. "Because I knew you'd react like this." I swallowed hard, feeling the ache in my chest deepen. "React like what? Like someone who spent half her life cleaning up the mess he left? Like someone who deserved at least a little respect?" He didn't answer, and that silence told me everything. Richard's presence wasn't just Sam's doing. Ethan had allowed it. Maybe even encouraged it. In that moment, I understood that my son had made a choice, and it wasn't me. I took a step back, suddenly feeling cold despite the warm California sun. "Enjoy your day, Ethan," I said quietly. "I hope you get everything you wanted." Then I turned away, ignoring the way my hands trembled. As I made my way toward the garden path that led to the parking lot, I kept my head high. The sound of laughter and music faded behind me, replaced by the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. I didn't know exactly what I would do next, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not let them rewrite my history or erase the truth of what happened to me. If walking away was the only way to keep my self-respect, then that's what I would do. I had survived worse than this, and I would survive this too. But this time, I would do it on my own terms. The evening light was turning golden, casting a warm glow over the vineyard as I walked toward the edge of the reception area, trying to find a moment of quiet before deciding whether to leave entirely. The clinking of glasses and hum of conversation faded just enough for me to hear a burst of laughter from the far side of the courtyard. I stopped without meaning to, drawn by the sound of Sam's voice. She was standing with her bridesmaids near the bar, her white gown shimmering in the soft light. Richard was only a few steps away, speaking to her parents, but Sam's words cut through the background noise. "It's better this way," she said, her tone casual, almost smug. "My family likes Richard, and he's paying for half the honeymoon. Linda's just history." I felt the air leave my lungs in a sharp, involuntary gasp. My name in her mouth like that, cold, dismissive, made me feel as if I had been pushed off a ledge. I stayed where I was, half hidden behind a vine-covered column, listening as one of her bridesmaids asked something I couldn't quite catch. Sam's reply came without hesitation. "She's always been the problem. Ethan knows it. This way, we can have the life we want without her getting in the middle." My heart pounded in my ears, each word slicing away what little trust I had left in my son's marriage. The truth hit me hard. Richard wasn't just here by chance. He had been brought in, welcomed, and given a place at their table, while I had been quietly pushed out. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about rewriting the family narrative so that I didn't belong in it anymore. A dozen emotions fought for control inside me. Anger at Ethan for allowing this, humiliation for being blindsided, grief for the years I had poured into raising him, believing that loyalty and love would always bind us. For a moment, I considered stepping out from behind the column, walking right up to Sam and telling her exactly what I thought of her. I imagined the shock on her face, the silence that would follow, the ripple it would send through the crowd. But then I thought of the way Richard was standing there, confident and collected, probably waiting for a moment like that to make me look small. I thought of Ethan, caught in the middle, but already leaning toward their side. I realized that no matter what I said tonight, they had already decided who I was in their story, and I would not give them the satisfaction of watching me unravel to prove their point. Slowly, I stepped back, keeping out of sight. My legs felt heavy as I turned toward the exit, each step carrying me farther from the fairy lights and the music. The laughter behind me grew softer, almost like it was drifting away down a long hallway. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling, and opened the family group chat, the one where I'd shared every holiday plan, every birthday wish, every little photo of Ethan through the years. My thumb hovered for a second before I pressed delete. The silence after that action felt strange, but also final. It was the sound of me taking back control, of drawing a line they could not cross again. As I reached the edge of the property, the sky above the vineyard was turning a deep shade of pink, the kind of beauty I might have paused to admire on any other day. Tonight, It felt like the last frame in a chapter I hadn't known was ending until now. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see the celebration I had been excluded from, or the faces of people who had decided I didn't matter. My car arrived, and I slipped inside, closing the door with a quiet click that seemed to seal off the noise of the world behind me. As we drove away, the fairy lights faded into the distance until they were just faint sparks in the dark, like memories I no longer wanted to keep. The betrayal still burned, but beneath it was something steadier, a determination that if they wanted to remove me from their lives, I would not beg to stay. They could have their carefully crafted version of family. I would have my self-respect. And that was worth more than any seat at their table. The week after the wedding felt strangely quiet, as if the noise and chaos of that day had drained something out of me that I couldn't get back. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, untouched. The family group chat gone, my inbox free from the usual casual messages from Ethan. I didn't expect to hear from him right away, but on the 7th day, my phone finally lit up with his name. I hesitated before answering, not out of anger, but because I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the excuses I knew were coming. When I picked up, his voice was tentative, almost boyish, the way it used to sound when he was a teenager asking for a favor. "Mom," he began, "I'm sorry I didn't warn you. I just thought it would be easier if you didn't know." I closed my eyes, holding back a bitter laugh. "Easier for who, Ethan? For me or for you?" There was a pause long enough that I could almost hear him thinking. "I didn't want you to get upset on my wedding day," he said finally. I gripped the phone tighter. "Ethan, you invited the man who abandoned us to one of the most important days of your life. You stood by while your wife told me not to speak to her family, and you didn't say a word in my defense. You think the problem was me knowing ahead of time? The problem is, you were okay with it happening at all." My voice was steady, but inside, the ache was deep and raw. He didn't try to argue. Instead, he sighed, and the distance between us felt wider than it had ever been. "I just thought maybe it was time to move on," he said. "Moving on doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen," I replied. "It doesn't mean erasing the people who stood by you when others walked away." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, but I knew I couldn't fill it for him anymore. When the call ended, I set the phone down and stared at the afternoon light spilling across my living room floor. That's when it hit me. My life wasn't going to go back to what it was before. This wasn't a temporary rift. It was a shift in the foundation of my relationship with my son. And as painful as it was, I realized I had to decide what my life would look like now, without waiting for his approval or his attention. In the days that followed, I started calling friends I hadn't seen in months, saying yes to lunch invitations, volunteering at the community center again. I filled my weekends with things that made me feel alive: gardening, baking for the neighbors, even joining a book club where no one knew anything about my family drama. I found comfort in the simple truth that I didn't have to be part of someone's version of family to live fully. I thought about Richard sometimes, about the way he had stood there at the wedding, like he belonged, and I realized he had no real power over me anymore. His presence at that event had hurt, yes, but it had also made something crystal clear. I didn't need closure from him, and I didn't need validation from Ethan or Sam to know my worth. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun dip behind the hills, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had walked away from the vineyard because staying would have meant surrendering my dignity. And in the weeks since, I had learned something important. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself. People will rewrite the past to suit their story, but you don't have to live inside their version of it. I couldn't change what happened at the wedding, and I couldn't make Ethan see things the way I did. But I could live a life where I was more than just history. I could be my own future. And maybe, one day, he would understand that too. Until then, I would keep moving forward, not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of someone who knows exactly who she is.